Welcome back to the Ancestral Findings podcast. There's something almost magical about a presidential inauguration. It's an event that signals a new chapter, a time when ordinary citizens, political figures, and visitors from around the world gather to see the peaceful continuation of leadership in a country that prizes its founding ideals. Yet for all of its pomp and circumstance, the roots of this ceremony are surprisingly humble, traced back to small gatherings, borrowed Bibles, and spontaneous celebrations. If you've ever wondered how these ceremonies began, or why they're filled with specific symbols and customs, settle in. We're about to explore the inaugural tradition as though we're on a friendly walk through American history together, stopping along the way to share the stories, personalities, and memorable moments that turned these events into national rituals. Let's begin with George Washington, who took the very first presidential oath of office on April 30th, 1789. The ceremony happened in New York City, then the nation's capital, on the balcony of Federal Hall. Imagine standing in the bustling streets below, looking up as the tall reserve general placed his hand on a borrowed Bible. Crowds of onlookers craned their necks to witness the birth of a new political era. Washington, whose quiet demeanor and reluctance to become a monarch-like figure, nonetheless carried a solemn resolve. When he finished repeating the oath, legend has it he added the words, "So help me God," spontaneously, though some historians debate exactly how or when that phrase entered the tradition. Washington then went inside to deliver his inaugural address to Congress. It was short and to the point, partly because he believed in letting actions speak louder than words, and partly because he was said to be anxious, addressing a legislative body for the first time in this new role. Afterward, citizens around the city erupted into celebration. You might picture groups gathering in taverns and on street corners, toasting this untested union. Little did anyone know just how firmly this country's peaceful transfer of power would endure. For quite some time after Washington's presidency, inaugurations typically took place on March 4th. That date marked the end of the old administration's term, providing a leisurely 4-month gap between the November election and the start of the new presidency. But across the 1800s and early 1900s, the country grew rapidly. Railroads and telegraphs shrank distance and time. Eventually, a 4-month delay began to feel too long, especially during national crises. Enter the 20th Amendment in 1933, which moved Inauguration Day to January 20th, except when that date falls on a Sunday, shifting some elements to the 21st. Picture the mixture of relief and urgency that came with this change. No longer did the country have to wait until early March for leaders to respond to pressing issues. The shift also meant planning for colder climates and unpredictable weather in the nation's capital. That's why you'll often see the new president, politicians, and guests braving the chill, sometimes huddled under blankets on the inaugural platform. Although New York hosted the initial inauguration and Philadelphia served as a temporary seat of government for the next few ceremonies, Washington, D.C. eventually became the official stage. One of the earliest inaugurations there took place when Thomas Jefferson assumed office in 1801. Legend has it that Jefferson chose to walk from his boarding house to the Capitol instead of taking a grand carriage. Citizens lined the dirt roads to greet him. That low-key entrance set the tone for his presidency, marking a simpler, more down-to-earth approach compared to the Federalist pomp and pageantry under his predecessors. Over the years, D.C. transformed from a swampy outpost to a grand city with the iconic Capitol Dome. By the time Abraham Lincoln took the oath in 1861, it was already a place of stately architecture, though still dotted with muddy construction sites. His inaugural address was delivered under the looming threat of civil war. Federal soldiers guarded the rooftops, scanning the crowds for any sign of violence. Today, we might think of inaugurations as carefully choreographed spectacles, but in Lincoln's era, the worry about national unity overshadowed the day's festivities. No sweeping story of presidential inaugurations would be complete without a few personal anecdotes and oddities that remind us these events are anything but routine. One legendary example is Andrew Jackson's inauguration in 1829. After taking the oath, he traveled to the White House, where a massive crowd of supporters poured inside for a public reception that turned into a boisterous gathering. Rumor has it they trampled fine furniture, spilled punch on expensive rugs, and even tried to follow Jackson into the private corridors. Household staff eventually lured the revelers back onto the lawn with tubs of liquor and refreshments. Another memorable instance occurred in 1841. William Henry Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address on record, nearly 2 hours, while exposed to an icy March wind without proper outerwear. About a month later, he died of pneumonia. This tragedy cast a somber light on the perils of ignoring Washington weather, and it served as a cautionary tale for future presidents who might be tempted to match Harrison's rhetorical stamina during outdoor ceremonies. And then there's the story of Calvin Coolidge's 1925 inauguration, the first to be broadcast on radio, marking a leap into a modern era. Suddenly, people across the country could experience the ceremony from their living rooms, forging a new national sense of shared celebration. Fast forward to 1949, when Harry Truman's inauguration became the first ever televised, and it's easy to see how technological leaps turned inaugurations into must-see events for Americans beyond the Capitol. The oath of office itself comes directly from the Constitution. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and so forth. Since Washington's day, presidents have often placed their hand on a Bible while reciting those words, though the Constitution does not require it. Some choose a family heirloom Bible, while others use historically significant ones, a way of symbolically linking their leadership to the country's founding principles or to personal traditions. Throughout history, presidents have handled the oath with subtle variations. Some repeated it verbatim, others inserted personal flourishes, and a few delivered it incorrectly. One modern leader famously had to retake the oath in private when a slight misstep in phrasing sparked questions about its legality. There's something undeniably human about these small twists of fate during what is arguably the biggest moment of a public servant's life. The style of each inauguration reflects the personality of the incoming leader. Some are formal affairs with stoic addresses, while others feature storytelling and laid-back humor. Another common thread is the presence of music. The U.S. Marine Band, the President's Own, has performed at almost every inauguration since Thomas Jefferson invited them. Their stirring marches help transform the Capitol steps into an open-air concert hall, building excitement for what comes next. Of all the elements that make an inauguration day special, the inaugural address can be the emotional center. Even people who rarely follow politics will tune in to hear the newly sworn-in president's vision for the future. Over time, these speeches have introduced phrases that become part of America's collective memory. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, given in 1865 as the Civil War neared its end, offered a sense of compassion and unity. With malice toward none, with charity for all, is still quoted whenever the country faces internal strife. Franklin D. Roosevelt's famous line from 1933, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," galvanized a nation mired in economic despair. John F. Kennedy's poetic 1961 address included, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," inspiring a generation to service. Because these speeches often present a hopeful glimpse at the road ahead, they carry an emotional weight beyond typical policy talk. In many ways, an inaugural address sets a tone, letting people either revel in optimism or steel themselves for challenging times. You can almost feel the country collectively leaning forward, hoping that the words they hear will shine a path toward unity or progress. Once the ceremonial swearing-in is complete, a wave of celebration usually follows. Historically, there's often a parade from the Capitol to the White House, showcasing marching bands, military units, floats, and cultural performances. It's an invitation for the public to join in, turning the streets of Washington into a mosaic of Americana. Walking along Pennsylvania Avenue, you see throngs of spectators wrapped in winter coats, children perched on parents' shoulders, and flags fluttering in the January breeze. In the past, inaugural parades weren't quite as scripted or secure, so spectators frequently surged around the presidential carriage. Nowadays, there's heavier security and designated seating areas, but the spirit remains the same. It's a show of unity and celebration, a chance for people to see their new leader in a more relaxed setting after the solemnity of the oath. Then there are the inaugural balls, glamorous gatherings filled with music, dancing, and noteworthy guests. At times, the number of official and unofficial balls has ballooned to more than a dozen in a single year. The newly sworn-in president typically makes appearances at several of them, pausing for a ceremonial first dance. Throughout the 19th century, these socials ranged from stately affairs to downright rowdy parties. Today, they're more polished, yet still reflect a sense of national festivity. Imagine the swirl of gowns and tuxedos under chandeliers, the clinking of glasses, and the flash of cameras as couples share a dance to mark the start of a new administration. From the earliest days, inaugurations have been shaped by technological breakthroughs and historical turning points. Think about radio in 1925. When Calvin Coolidge's second inauguration was broadcast nationwide, families gathered around their radio sets to listen. Suddenly, the distance from D.C. to the rest of the country shrank. Television in 1949. Millions could now watch Harry Truman deliver his address live, seeing his gestures and the expressions of the crowd. It turned the inauguration into a visual spectacle, complete with the tense moments and confetti flutter. Color TV, satellite, and internet age. Dwight D. Eisenhower's and John F. Kennedy's ceremonies emerged in color footage. By the late 20th century, cable networks offered hours of coverage. In the 21st century, streaming video allows global audiences to tune in from smartphones or laptops. As we've evolved from print newspapers to TikTok clips, these ceremonies continue to adapt, ensuring that each generation experiences the excitement in its own way. The essential components, oath, address, parade, remain constant, but the delivery method changes. For those who relish historical trivia, it's remarkable how each shift in communication marks a bigger sense of national inclusivity. January in Washington, D.C. can be brutally cold. Over the decades, the elements have added a dynamic twist to the pageantry. William Henry Harrison's ill-fated 1841 address in freezing rain stands as the cautionary example of ignoring the forecast. Yet, in other years, the weather has cooperated to create sparkling scenes of winter sunshine. There have also been storms that forced the ceremony indoors. For instance, Ronald Reagan's second inauguration in 1985 faced such frigid temperatures and high winds that officials moved it into the Capitol Rotunda. Attendees huddled inside, relieved to escape the sub-zero chill. While it might have lacked the open-air drama, it proved that safety and comfort can win out over tradition when the situation is dire. Whether the day is drenched in sunshine or battered by a winter storm, it's a vivid reminder that inaugurations, like history itself, don't always go exactly as planned. Certain iconic images have embedded themselves into America's collective consciousness. The new president with a hand on a centuries-old Bible, the Marine Band striking up a patriotic tune, the slow roll of a parade carriage, or these days a highly secure vehicle, carrying the new chief executive down Pennsylvania Avenue. These snapshots convey more than a simple ceremony. They evoke a sense of continuity stretching back to 1789. Even the seating arrangement and who stands on the inaugural platform matter. Supreme Court justices, military leaders, past presidents, and family members all gather to bear witness. It's one of the few events where you might spot political rivals perched near one another, a nod to the idea that, on Inauguration Day, unity and respect for the office momentarily overshadow partisanship. In modern years, poets have been invited to share their verses as part of the ceremony. One of the most famous examples was Robert Frost at John F. Kennedy's inauguration in 1961. The sun's glare off the snow made it difficult for Frost to read his prepared piece, so he recited from memory instead. The moment was both graceful and heartwarming, a legendary poet forging a link between art, youth, and a national mission. More recently, other poets have stepped to the lectern, using language to reflect the heartbeat of the nation, weaving in historical echoes and forward-looking hopes. Musical selections also matter. Artists perform the national anthem or other patriotic pieces, bringing their own style to songs many have heard from childhood. It can be a high-stakes performance, given the emotional weight of the occasion. Whether it's a cappella or accompanied by the Marine Band, that moment resonates across the Capitol grounds and via television or live stream across living rooms nationwide. One of the most admired aspects of Inauguration Day is the customary handshake between the incoming and outgoing presidents. It's a symbolic way to demonstrate a peaceful transfer of power, a core principle that has defined the United States since its birth. Some leaders have embraced this tradition more warmly than others. There have been rare instances when outgoing presidents chose to skip the ceremony altogether, but even those were overshadowed by the more common gesture of mutual respect. On many occasions, the departing administration offers the new president a ride from the White House to the Capitol, sharing a final conversation in the back seat of a government vehicle. Upon the ceremony's completion, the roles reverse. The newly sworn-in leader returns to the White House while the predecessor departs. The pace can feel bittersweet, like a changing of the guard at a historical fortress. For eyewitnesses, it's an emotional roller coaster as they watch one era fade away and another begin. Stepping away from the formal ceremony, let's imagine the enchantment of an inaugural ball later that evening. There might be multiple balls, each with a distinct theme and crowd. Tickets can range from accessible to exclusive, with celebrities, prominent donors, politicians, and everyday supporters mingling. The attire is elegant. Gowns, suits, lively chatter as an orchestra tunes up under sparkling chandeliers. The newly sworn-in president and first spouse typically arrive on stage, wave to the crowd, and share a first dance. Cameras flash, and couples on the dance floor sway to the music. It's part celebration, part tradition, and part exhale after the whirlwind of the day's protocol. Over the centuries, these balls have added a festive flair to what is essentially a formal government procedure. They invite the public to feel like part of the occasion, reminding everyone that the presidency touches lives far beyond the government's inner circles. By the time the festivities wind down, guests drift back to hotels or homes, staff clean up the confetti and half-empty glasses, and the new president, finally, settles into the White House. It's a moment of transformation, of stepping fully into the responsibilities that come with the Oval Office. In the following days, the grand stage is dismantled, bleachers are taken apart, and Pennsylvania Avenue returns to everyday traffic. Yet the essence lingers, a newly scripted chapter in American leadership. What makes it so meaningful? Perhaps it's the sense of continuity. Inauguration Day may incorporate fresh ideas and personalities, but it relies on structures set in place centuries ago. Its significance rests on the beliefs that unify a sprawling nation. A reverence for peaceful transitions, an appreciation for ceremony, and the recognition of a shared destiny. For many observers, the power of the event lies in its ability to remind citizens that, beyond debates or daily headlines, there's something fundamentally unifying at the heart of the American experiment. Returning to where we started, envision the day in 1789 when George Washington stood on that balcony in New York City. He could never have anticipated a world of high-definition broadcasts, social media, or inaugural balls with thousands of guests. Yet his measured bow to the crowd and his recitation of the oath set the tone for every future inauguration. By humbly taking on a role no one had ever held, Washington established a ritual that would be repeated countless times. Each new iteration adds its own flourish, shaped by the era's tastes, issues, and technological breakthroughs. In some ways, we can feel the echo of that first ceremony in every modern inauguration. The sense of turning a page, setting a course, and reaffirming a collective commitment to a higher ideal. People may line the streets, braving the cold, or tune in through their favorite digital platforms. They might hear stirring music and poetry, or simply see beaming faces in the stands. No matter the generation, the experience underscores a promise that even in a nation as diverse and spirited as the United States, the peaceful exchange of power remains a steadfast tradition. So, when the next inauguration rolls around, take a moment to picture yourself standing among the throngs on Pennsylvania Avenue or in your living room watching history unfold. You'll see more than a procedural oath. You'll see an entire tapestry of past ceremonies woven into that moment. From the spirited parties of Andrew Jackson's time to the radio transmissions of Coolidge's era to today's global telecasts, each piece forms a grand mosaic celebrating the idea that leadership in America doesn't halt. It continues, renewed and reimagined every time a president raises their right hand and pledges to serve. Thanks for spending time with me on the Ancestral Findings podcast. I always enjoy sharing these stories, tips, and discoveries with you. If you haven't already, head over to ancestralfindings.com, where you can download a free genealogy ebook, request a free lookup, and of course enter to win the next book giveaway. It's been an incredible journey together since 1995, and your support through these past 29 years means more to me than words can express. I'm so grateful for this wonderful community of genealogy enthusiasts who continue to inspire me every day. Keep up the great work on your family history research, and may your next find be as exciting as your first. Thank you again for being part of this journey, and as always, happy searching.